Sometimes, a seemingly minor change can have massive ramifications. Take a random Week 2 NFL game from 2001 as an example of this. In this game, the New England Patriots were playing the visiting New York Jets. All was going according to schedule, until it wasn't. Late in the fourth quarter, with just under 5 minutes left to play, Mo Lewis of the Jets hit Patriots quarterback Drew Bledsoe as he stepped out of bounds. The result of this seemingly nondescript play? Drew Bledsoe was removed from the game due to a concussion, and some guy named Tom Brady stepped in to take his place. 7 Super Bowl victories for Brady later, and this one hit is remembered as one of the most important moments in all of American football. Not that anyone would have predicted any of this before the start of the game. You see, we as a species are kind of bad at predicting what will and won't matter to future generations. Y2K was hyped up as a world-ending catastrophe, the likes of which humanity had never seen, and yet, when December 31st, 1999 came and went, little changed. The world moved on as always. And yet, tragically, only a little over a year later, an idyllic September day would go down in eternal infamy. But all of that is pretty heavy, and you're not here to listen to me talk about things that actually matter. You're here to listen to me talk about video games, specifically Behavior Interactive's silly little murder simulator. So let's do that. In thinking about the most impactful days in the history of Dead by Daylight, what comes to mind? June 14th, 2016, the day the game was launched, obviously matters a great deal. But what else? How about August 18th of the same year, when DBD proved it had some legs by launching its first DLC chapter, The Last Breath? Or how about 2 months after that, when the addition of the Halloween license legitimized the game in the eyes of more casual audiences? These are all undoubtedly important days to the now lengthy history of Dead by Daylight, but I think we tend to skip over some of the other very important dates, too. Take June 12th, 2018 as an example. Do you know off the top of your head what happened that day? Do you know why it's an important day for DBD? No, they didn't add an important license or meta-shifting perk change. June 12th, 2018 was the day Behavior added an in-game store to Dead by Daylight that allowed players a wider array of customization. Now, I know some people closed this video as soon as I said adding a cosmetic shop was one of the game's most important decisions. I know some people likely disliked this video as soon as humanly possible, and I'm okay with that. But hear me out. No, adding an in-game store wasn't world-shaking for DBD because it eventually enabled Bunny Fang, Krampus Trapper, and a whole host of Thirst Trap cosmetics. The cosmetics were not, in and of themselves, important. What mattered most was the message being sent. From that day onward, Behavior would adopt the practices of more lucrative gaming properties. Beginning with the store and carrying through to the current year, Behavior has shown a clear inclination towards heavy monetization. They aren't alone in this pursuit either, and they actually manage to milk their audience more successfully than most. You see, while you may be annoyed by Behavior's now established reliance on overpriced skins, you have to give them some credit. For as greedy as their practices may be, at least they haven't allowed microtransactions to ruin the game in the same way that these very practices have killed games like Fallout 76, the Assassin's Creed franchise, or really any sports video game franchise. Like all corporations, Behavior is greedy, but they're not as stupid as people make them out to be. In fact, I'd say they generally know what they're doing. The next major event in DBD's history is likely September 17th, 2019. This was when Stranger Things was added to the game, and the player base skyrocketed like it had never done before. Behavior would experience similar success roughly 2 years later when the first Resident Evil chapter burst onto the scene and brought about another era of increased popularity. But what point am I trying to make by saying all of these things? What thesis am I working my way towards? Well, to phrase it as best I can, I'm trying to say that Behavior has learned some interesting habits over the years, and that these habits greatly color not only what Dead by Daylight is, but what it will become. You see, amongst the many lessons Behavior has learned, perhaps the most important are the following two. Number 1, microtransactions sell. And number 2, organic hype is hard to come by. Let's break both of those down for a moment. When I say that microtransactions sell, I'd imagine you have one of two reactions. You either say, yeah, duh, or something along the lines of, not to me, I never buy them. And while I'm perfectly willing to accept those viewpoints, I fear they miss the point I'm making entirely. The point being that these days, behavior makes the majority of their income through microtransactions. There was a time when the game's health depended heavily on growing the player count and releasing financially successful chapters, but that day has come and gone. These days, it doesn't matter nearly as much whether an original chapter goes over well or not. Take two polar opposite chapters as evidence of this, those being Chains of Hate and Portrait of a Murder. With Chains of Hate, behavior introduced a very popular killer, the Deathslinger, a generally well-liked survivor in Zarina, one of the game's best maps in Dead Dog Saloon, and an exciting new game mechanic in Breakable Walls. Overall, the Chains of Hate chapter was one of the most well-received to date. Portrait of a Murder was not so lucky. The Eerie map was perceived as being way too survivor-sided, the artist was just another in a long line of anti-loop killers, no new game mechanics were added, and Jonah has gone on to be possibly the least popular survivor in the game from both a lore and character design standpoint. By all accounts, this chapter was a bit of a disaster. But was it really? For as much praise as Chains of Hate received, and as much criticism as Portrait of a Murder got, did either chapter really move the needle in a substantive way? I'd personally argue that no, neither did. And that comes down to what we've already discussed. Both chapters introduced new cosmetics to the store, and likely made money hand over fist. You see, it cost only $7 to buy either of these chapters, but if you want a legendary skin for Deathslinger, Zarina, Artist, or Jonah, that'll be $10, please and thank you. And that's before you factor in other characters that also got new skins during the chapter's life cycles, which equates to more easy money. These chapters share something else in common too, but this commonality relates more to my second point, the point that organic hype is hard to come by. Because whether or not you believe Chains of Hate or Portrait of a Murder move the needle, there can be no denying that what came after them did. Chains of Hate was followed swiftly by the monstrously successful Silent Hill chapter. Portrait of a Murder was followed immediately by the Ringu chapter. In both cases, the original chapters took a backseat in terms of hype to the licensed chapters that succeeded them. More than anything, the original chapters seemed to exist mostly to please the core fanbase and also to maintain casual interest in the game until the next big announcement. And in fairness to behavior, it's not hard to see why they've shifted towards this hype-heavy model of development. I mean, speaking honestly, what generates more hype? Competent and well-designed killers like Oni and Blight, or flawed but popular killers like Freddy Krueger and Amanda Young? Obviously, the jumps in player count show a clear public preference for licensed content, even if it's worse than the original content from a gameplay standpoint. And this is something of a shame, because Behavior has made some really amazing original content. Characters like Plague, Huntress, Oni, and Clown are genuinely great, and make me wish for more original content. But I understand Behavior can't really afford to bank too heavily on concepts they create. For recent proof of this, just look at the community's largely negative and, let's be honest, childish reaction to the reveal that Year 6 was going to be The Dredge and not a licensed chapter. Okay, so hype and microtransactions are the way of the future. But what does it mean? Well, to me, it means we should expect a lot more Attack on Titan skin packs, to put it one way. By incorporating a license that many thought would never work in DBD, the devs have shown their desire to hook new players by any means necessary. At this point, I believe Dead by Daylight is just shy of Smite and Fortnite when it comes to games that will add basically any character. I mean, just think about it. Behavior have shown that non-horror properties like Stranger Things and Attack on Titan have a place in modern DBD. They've shown that they'll make unlikely properties like Ringu and Hellraiser fit if the financial incentive is right. They've proven they can work around legal boundaries to include characters like Ghostface and Ash Williams. Without doubt, they've shown a clear willingness to sexualize their characters more and more, so long as the money keeps rolling in. In short, behavior have shown that be it in the form of a legendary skin, a one-off paragraph, or a full-blown chapter with all the bells and whistles, any character in existence is fair game when it comes to their chances of joining the fog. Some may be more likely than others, but nobody is truly off limits. Jason, Springtrap, Cthulhu, Candyman, Scooby-Doo, Predator, Pennywise, Ninja Turtles, Death Note, Cabin in the Woods, Tucker and Dale, Darth Vader, Shao Kahn. The list goes on and on and on and on. No matter how unlikely a chapter may seem, we've seen enough over the years that it's finally time to accept that we can never say never. Sure, some properties seem outright ridiculous and probably won't happen, but you can't rule them out, because this is Dead by Daylight, and in Dead by Daylight, anything goes.
I've been dreaming on in my head like I've seen it. A life worth living is a life with meaning. I'll do what I love till my heart stops beating. I'm feeding this demon. Got a taste, can't erase bitterness in my